Hello patrons and friends, Rob Caskie proudly telling stories. We find ourselves at the moment on South Africa's Highveld on a farm between the towns of Belfast and Dullstroom. The Highveld runs between 5,000 and 7,500 feet above sea level here in South Africa, where indeed the air is thin, the winters are particularly cold, but the waters in the local streams are gin clear and ideal for trout, both rainbow and brown. Nearby town of Mashadodorp has had its name changed to Emakazeni. Makaza is cold, Emakazeni, the place of cold, and indeed the winters up here get very cold indeed. Now, as a young boy growing up in Mooi River on a farm, the local vet one day arrived to help my father with a problem he had with one of his cattle, and my father reminded him that he was indeed my godfather and had agreed to be my godfather at the time I was born. And I think feeling a little bit bad about the fact that he'd clearly forgotten that, having had some difficult times in his life between my birth and the age of 8, he gave me 10 rand, which at that time, 1974, was a lot of money. And I begged my father to allow me the following day to walk into Mooi River, a distance of 8 kilometers, to go to the local electrical store owned at the time by Rob Adamson, and to try and buy myself a fly fishing kit, my first fly fishing kit. Now, it's often said that fly fishing is to fishing what high seduction is to rape. And I, as a young boy, dreamed of owning a fly fishing kit and learning to try and fish for trout, particularly in these clear waters that abound on the Highveld of South Africa. And Rob Adamson was kind enough to sell me a rod, a reel, and line, fly fishing line, for the princely sum of 10 rand in 1974. I know that it was probably more like 12 or 13 rand, but this dear man was impressed at the fact that I'd walked all the way into town to buy this equipment. I still have that rod and that reel and the line bought all those years ago in 1974. Now, I know that folks go on and on about tapered leaders and how one presents the fly and various casting techniques and how folks creep up on trout in these gin clear streams in America, in Canada, in parts of Britain. For me, fly fishing has always been about just trying to get yourself into a position to present a fly in such a way that the trout will hopefully take the fly. I know these days that saltwater fly fishing has become the buzzword, a bit like mountain biking. So many folks are getting into saltwater fly fishing that I sadly know very little about. But on this magnificent property, where the Elands River has been weird and dammed in various places for the holding and the production of incredible trout, we are fortunate enough to find ourselves catching some fish. Interesting to note too how different the take is and the fight of the brown trout and the rainbow trout. We have found on our occasion here in some of the bigger dams, as we cast out our fly for the first time, allowed to land on the water and allowed to sink, it's often taken gently as that fly is sinking. And invariably, it's been a big brown trout. And the fight of the brown is completely different to the rainbow. These bigger brown trout have not taken to the surface or come out of the water at any point, and we've brought them into the edge, carefully landed them, released the barbless hook, and let them back into their watery domain. The rainbows, on the other hand, have been vigorous fighters, often taking out of the water into the air in these aerial displays, trying to get rid of the fly, and oftentimes they do. They manage to spit out our fly. On other occasions, we manage to land them and release them. And the challenges in these weirs and the narrow little stream that runs between these bodies of fishing water are just magnificent. We can really practice your casting into a stream that at times is little more than 4 or 5 foot wide. Land the fly and try to bring it in carefully, getting a trout to take the fly. It has been absolutely magnificent. I've been lucky enough to fish in Canada, in Alaska, and in New Zealand, oftentimes with spinning gear rather than fly fishing gear. And I would love to go back and fish in those areas with fly fishing gear. But as a backpacker, traveling as I did all those years ago, the idea of fishing with fly fishing equipment for salmon and trout in those environs was financially out of the question. I was recently sent photographs by some fishermen who'd been catching trout going up the big river out of Lake Taupo in New Zealand to spawn, catching both cock and hen fish, just the most magnificent trout. But here we find ourselves on the Highveld of South Africa at a property that we've been lucky enough to be visiting since 2011, 10 years now, and it has only gotten better. I think with the abundant rain and the flood levels that we've had this year, that some of the fish have been swept further downstream by the huge amount of water passing down the stream and through the dams. But the trout fishing in these parts remains as good as I've ever remembered. And what a privilege it is to get out in these cold afternoons. We're filming indoors today with a fire behind me, as you can see, because the wind, a cold wind, what some would call a Japanese wind because there's a nip in it, outside, has precluded us filming outside because of the whoosh of the wind in the microphone. But I'm definitely going to be going down a little bit later this afternoon with a friend of mine to try and extract more of these salmonoids from these lovely waters, and hopefully we'll keep one to take home as a lovely treat. But for me, who dreamt as a little boy of fly fishing and buying that first rod at age 8, now in my mid-50s, to be here with some better equipment and able to go and test my equipment and indeed my wits and skill against these wily trout in surroundings with mountain reedbuck, eland, baboon, and all these Afro-montane birds that you find at this high elevation is an absolute delight and a very special interlude in my usual day job with battlefield tours, and comes as a magnificent bonus after our Cape Town road trip that only ended a week ago. Thank you very much for your time and attention.